Hi, it's me again, Lucky from Bring Forth. This is, I believe, 17 part 4. Let me check. This will take only a second. If this internet browser thing worked well. Load, you unwieldy behemoth. There we go, wrong page. This is part 7, set 17 part 4. I'd like to discuss the Anunnaki. And this is one of those stories that is actually quite interesting. They were people from the northern highlands or the northern mountains on the northernmost side of Persia and Babylonia, because in their culture it was common for people to get really good food or die. So their numbers were small, but they were very large and they were very muscular. And they, throughout history, infiltrated and invaded Persia. And throughout history, the Persians, who were one of the first people to learn farming, had not so good food, because farmers don't eat well in organized societies. They eat just enough to survive, and they give everything else for somebody else because they need money in organized societies. Unlike hunter-gatherer societies where the entire group eats well, because every member of the group is known and needed by the other members of the group instead of being unknown. So this Anunnaki, or these northern giants, were revered as gods by the people of Persia for a very long time. But they were actually, this is perhaps the most contentious part, but they were Nordics. They were people from the Aryan steppes on the northern side of Persia. And they were not really aliens in the way that we commonly understand aliens in the modern society, because they weren't from another planet, but they were from another energy type. They were from another society. They were from another energy production scheme. They, due to their low population, had the ability to advance in technology much higher than the Persians had, but because they never really took to farming, they didn't really have the numbers to influence the world in a way that we would expect them to have with their high level of technology. They were like the Netherlandsian people. They had much higher levels of technology than the British, but they still lost in a lot of their wars. So these people of the steppes are in later eras known most likely as Mongols or the Hun, which invaded Europe. And had the European religious powers of France and Italy actually fallen to the Mongols, they would be known as gods. They would be known as the, whatever we would call them, the Anunnaki. So the Anunnaki group is one of the easiest to identify alien groups. They are one of the easiest stories to decode. You will very easily understand why they were so different from the common people and what really happened. So I'm going to take these updates today to talk about a lot of these alien groups and a lot of the myths surrounding them and how to actually decode those myths, so that we can have a better understanding of what we're talking about here, so that people in modern day Kazakhstan don't get worried when people from my group are actually roaming the country and looking for alien bases, because they understand what we're actually looking for. We're not looking for the XCOM style base, though that would be nice to find. We're looking for these sites where these myths actually coincide with reality, so where we can find a windmill that was 1,000 years more advanced than anything else, because that will be an alien. So a lot of the things that I'm talking about here aren't that difficult to conceptually understand for a modern human. We just
think that if you are 2 steps more advanced in your energy production scheme than the people next to you, you will be known as an alien, because the people next to you will be aiming for your feet. They will not be aiming for you. They will never be aiming for you, because to them your ways seem archaic, because you are only interested in the archaic part of their culture. So you never discuss their goals, you never discuss their dreams, because you have already evolved beyond that. You must be forced by yourself, by very strong will and spiritual desire, to be able to interact with these people, because you will be interacting with an animal. You will be interacting with somebody who has no conceptual understanding of what you're doing. And I will be using these updates as I roam the internet to look for signs of what people currently believe to be alien groups, and I will discuss the more interesting ones. So you have to understand that when we talk about geothermal energy, as we talked about in the first update here, or the first video here, that we are actually talking about a system of energy production that is even... Actually, I need to look for this in a better way. You have to understand that, according to modern understanding, this is the best article I have ever found, and it talks about energy production in 2015 if we go for a completely renewable path. It has 0.67% geothermal and 21.36% solar power. Everything else is kinda 23.52 onshore wind. Everything else is kinda in between those two. But from even this you can see that by 2050 geothermal energy will be 0.67% if the entire world goes 100% renewables for some reason. This is minuscule compared to what we would possibly have if we went full geothermal. Full geothermal would be several generations ahead of what we have, and it is too advanced for most people. So a lot of these things, even if we go for a full renewable path and full technological development, will be ahead of us for generations. These aliens like the Nordics who happen to live in Iceland, which is at what, 75% geothermal, a lot of these people will be so far advanced compared to us that it'll be people who have just mastered fire talking to the people who have built their first windmill. It is a discussion where we simply don't have the words. It is a discussion of feelings. So it will be feeling feelings around animals and hoping for a scientific outcome. It will be insanely difficult and insanely long work, but hopefully we will eventually find some kind of common ground and be able to understand one another. So that is basically all on the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki seem to be a solar-powered society. They seem to be, perhaps they are even wind, because that would be one step above solar. Perhaps they are even a wind-powered society. Either way, it's probably one of those two. That would make them, if we look from a coal point of view, it's coal, nuclear, bio, wind. They would be 3 generations ahead of us. And if you imagine 3 generations behind us from a coal era, you get to basically wind in the sense that you have a ship that has wind and you have a windmill that mills grain that doesn't produce electricity. It is such a reach of mind to understand these different cultures that it is virtually impossible to do well, but it has to be attempted. So the Anunnaki are an interesting story. It's one of the first alien stories that are actually easy to decode. It's like the Garden of Babylon, which is a little bit more difficult to decode, but it isn't impossible. The Garden of Babylon was most likely one of those islands in the Red Sea, or the I don't remember what's the name of the sea between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but probably one of those islands there that was very well kept by the locals, and it was a veritable paradise of life compared to the deserts outside. So that was probably the Garden of Eden in the historical sense, and the people who lived there were known as the people who live in Eden. It's like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which was attempted to be a similar thing but was smaller because it was just a building. These myths are easy to decode, but some of them are not. Some of them are real brain hurters. So from that point of view, you can understand a biosociety, a completely renewable society that only burns plant life, compared to a society that hasn't invented the windmill, hasn't invented the watermill, and is just beginning to invent the water screw, or the ability to transport water up a hill through a pipe that has a screw inside it, so that when you spin it, the water is always climbing upwards in that pipe, and then having an animal at the top of the device keep going in a circle, and that power is transported into that pipe so that it can keep bringing water up a hill. These people were so advanced compared to their normal society that the only realistic way to describe them were aliens. They were one step ahead from being one step ahead. They were beyond understanding. They were beyond comprehension. So yeah, the Anunnaki, I recommend that you study them. They were a very interesting society, and they had a lot of very interesting things to say, and they discussed astronomy, for example, in exquisite detail, because they had no background light from cities. So when they went into the forest, they could see a lot of stars a lot more clearly, and they had an oral history where they actually followed these stars move, and they found the planets a lot sooner than we did. So they discussed a lot of this with the Persians, who for the most part consider them gods because of their understanding, but keeping in mind they were actually more primitive than the Persians is what makes them aliens, because they had technology but they didn't have a way of doing the technology into the world.